I want to challenge you to stop for a minute and think about what is your highest priority in life. In other words, what is most important to you? One of the things I hear a lot is, well, I just want to be happy, or I want my child to be happy. I want my friend to be happy. And that's a good thing to want that for people, want it for ourselves. But generally connected to that is an idea that helps us do that, at least in our thinking, to follow happiness. And that is, well, if I really want to be happy, I need to follow my heart. And that's the advice we give to others quite often. Well, make sure you just follow your heart in this. Well, this week's Bible memory verse speaks very clearly to that. And as you might be suspecting already, gives a very strong warning about using those very ideas of follow your heart. And here's what the verse says, and it's from Jeremiah 17:9. The prophet Jeremiah gave it to us long ago, but it is so practical and has deeply impacted me over the last several years for me to just keep going back to it time and again to be reminded of its significant truth. And here's what Jeremiah said. The heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? So let's take just a few minutes and unpack what that verse is telling us. First of all, Jeremiah is saying, well, those inner feelings that we have, the emotions, our thinking, our reasoning that comes from inside of us, that we all have, that's part of who we are. He's saying, be careful because it is incredibly deceitful. And what he means is, I may be wrong. You may be wrong. Now, we will mean well because this is the very idea of, I am following my heart. This is what my heart is telling me to do. But even though that is a very deep-seated feeling and emotion, it may be wrong. And that's Jeremiah's point, that we can be absolutely convinced we are right when we are absolutely wrong. And I've certainly found that to be true in my own life. I have been completely convinced that I was absolutely right about something, only to find out later I wasn't. I was completely wrong. And that's a humbling experience, but it is a true experience. And I think one that every one of us will admit if we stop and really think about it and think about that truth. So that's the first thing Jeremiah is telling us, that our own feelings about something, that inner voice that we have, be very careful because it may not be right at all. And the second thing he tells us is the reason why it may not be right. And he says, not only is it deceitful more than all else, but he says it is desperately sick. And what he means by that is it is confused and twisted and wrong because of sin. And that's something that, again, is not pleasant for us to think about, and it's certainly not something that our world likes to talk about now. We find so many ways of excusing our behavior with different illnesses and different things that have happened to us. I've experienced abuse, and so how I act now, I can't help. Well, we do have choices of how we act and how we react. But the thing that we need to recognize at that deepest level of who we are, deep down in our heart, in our deepest emotions, our deepest thinking, I am affected and I am changed by sin. And so Jeremiah says, if we're all honest with ourselves, we have to confess and admit that inner part of me is messed up and it is desperately sick. It needs help. And it needs help that only God can give, because God is the only one that can begin transforming that inner part of who I am. And so let's think through what Jeremiah is telling us. He says, the heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. And then that last phrase, he says, who can understand it? And that's what I really want to make sure that we understand today, in that when I begin to recognize that the deepest part of me, my heart, is confused and it is twisted by sin, by all those wrong things that I've done, that I've allowed to become part of my life, and to the voices that I'm listening to that are not good voices, that are not voices of truth, I begin to come to that point where, well, who do I listen to? And how can I trust my own heart? And the answer is, well, I can't completely trust my own heart. And that's what I want to get to finally today, is the application of this verse. That if it is true that our heart is deceitful more than all else, and it is desperately sick, and it brings us to that question, who can understand it? Well, God can. And that's exactly what Jeremiah was leading to, is that God is the one that knows me and knows my heart better than I do. And if I will yield to God and let Him begin working in me, then He will start leading me to make those right decisions. And it's just like the idea of spending time with a good friend. The more time you spend with that friend, the better you understand who they are. The better you understand what they want to do when you're trying to decide, well, what are we going to do tonight? You know, just by nature of that person, because you've spent time with them, you've listened to them, genuinely listened to them, and genuinely got to know who they are, you begin to communicate at a much deeper level. That's exactly how it is with God. The more time I spend reading the Bible and the more time I spend praying, the better I get to know God, so that as I listen to my heart, I recognize, man, I can be wrong and I can be completely misled by what I want. It helps me recognize and admit, God, I really need you, and helps me focus my prayers to Him to say, God, give me wisdom. Give me direction. Help me make the right decision regardless of how I feel. And so that's what I want to encourage you with this week, is that the inner part of us, our deepest heart of who we are, can be very misleading, very deceitful, but God will work in that to guide us. And so listen to God and hold on to one particular truth this week, in that as we follow that inner voice and learn to listen to what God is telling us to do, please hold on to this truth. God will never ask us to do or lead us to do something the Bible clearly says is wrong. You can guarantee, if you are convinced in your heart that something is what you ought to do and it is the right thing to do, but it is described in the Bible as wrong, you can guarantee your heart's deceiving you, and it is desperately sick, and it's going to cause problems in your life. So go back to God. Spend time with Him. Let Him give that wisdom and that guidance, the strength to do the right thing regardless of what my heart says to do. Thank you so much for being with me, and I hope you'll join me again next week.